Hello, this is Ms. Suchitra Pareekh, Principal of Ramnivas Bajaj English High School, dealing with the 9th standard portion of ICSE on the study of the bisexual flower. Today we will talk about the last portion of the chapter on fertilization. Fertilization is the process in which the male gamete and the female gamete fuse. The site of fertilization in a flower is the ovary, exactly speaking the ovule. The pollen grain carries the male gamete. The ovule inside the ovary contains the female gamete. The pollen grain is a double walled structure containing a nucleus and cytoplasm. Its nucleus divides into two. There is a tube nucleus which is larger one, and there is a generative nucleus behind. The generative nucleus, it divides into two male cells or gametes as they are called, while the pollen grain lands itself on a particular flower where it affects pollination. That means the flower of the same species. Ovule is the other part that has to take part in fertilization. The ovule is a part of the ovary. It is attached through the placenta to the ovary, and it becomes the seed after fertilization. Inside the ovary there may be one or more ovules. If there is one ovule, it becomes a single seeded fruit. If it contains many ovules, it becomes many seeded fruit. Each ovule needs to be fertilized separately. The covering of the ovule, the integuments, becomes the seed coat. In the seed coat, we know there is an opening called micropyle in the seed. This micropyle is also present in the ovule as an opening in between the integuments, through which the pollen tube, which has germinated after landing on the stigma and reached down, the pollen tube enters through this micropyle into the ovule. The mass of tissue around it forms the food, the nucellus. There are 8 cells actually inside the embryo sac, inside the nucellus. So, structure of ovule having integuments with a micropyle, nucellus and embryo sac. Embryo sac is an 8 cell structure, of which 3 cells at one end and 3 at the other end. The center one is a fusion of 2 nuclei having common space cytoplasm. So, it appears like a one cell. The 3 cells which are at the micropylar end consist of 2 sides synergids and the central egg cell, whereas the 3 other cells at the other end of the embryo sac are called antipodal cells. The central one is the bipolar nuclei. The pollen grain, when it lands on the proper stigma where pollination is affected, its exine, the outer wall of the pollen grain, has those little openings through which the inner wall, the intine, starts flowing out like a pollen tube. It travels down the length of the style and reaches the micropyle of the ovule. Over there, the wall of the intine and the wall of the embryo sac, they dissolve. The tube nucleus has completed its function, so it gets degenerated, and the 2 male gametes push their way between the synergids, and the first one fuses with the egg cell and the second one fuses with the polar nuclei in the center. The fertilization in the flower is called double fertilization because the 2 male gametes fuse with two different nuclei in the ovule. The one with the egg cell forms the embryo, and the one which is fertilizing the polar nuclei forms the endosperm. In fact, this is a very commonly asked, very important question from the examination point of view. What happens to the ovary after fertilization? The most important part is, yes, ovary turns into fruit, but the most important part is that the zygote that is formed due to the fusion between the male gamete and the egg cell develops into the embryo. We have studied in the seed, the embryo consists of plumule and radicle. That's the part that this fusion develops into, and this is the zygote. The second fusion of the bipolar nuclei and the male gamete, it forms the endosperm. A question arises in our mind because we haven't seen an endosperm separately in a dicot seed. In a dicot seed, the endosperm fuses into the cotyledon, and therefore the cotyledons are large. Whereas in a monocot seed, we have seen the grain like maize, where the endosperm is separate and remains intact separately without getting fused into the cotyledons. But endosperm is present as food for the growing embryo in both the seeds. Another very important thing also from the examination point of view is what is the fate of the flower and all its other parts after fertilization, because flower's main function is to bring about this reproduction and this fertilization. So what happens to it after it is fertilized? The petals, the stamens, the style and the stigma, they by and large dry, wither and fall off. Occasionally there are a few examples, exceptions are always there in the biological world, where they may stay on, and they are found even after the flower is changed into a fruit, has got developed into a fruit. Calyx very often dry, shrivel and fall off. In some cases, like in case of brinjal, we have seen a green crown like structure on the fruit of brinjal. That's a persistent calyx. So in some cases, like in brinjal, we saw that the calyx may persist, but generally dry, shrivel and fall off. Ovary becomes the fruit and ovule becomes the seed. So that is the end of the chapter on bisexual flowers. Thank you all very much.